I celebrate myself and sing myself. And what I assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you.
I think I will do nothing for a long time but listen. I hear the bravura of birds, the bustle of growing wheat, gossip of flames, the clack of sticks cooking my meals. I hear the sound of the human voice, a sound I love. I hear all sounds as they are turned to their uses. Sounds of the city and sounds out of the city, sounds of the day and night. Well, my name is Greg Trupiano. I'm the artistic director of the Walt Whitman Project. The Walt Whitman Project is a community-based arts organization. Our major function is to remind people that Walt Whitman spent a third of his 72 years in Brooklyn. Now, I chose this site, Fort Greene Park, as a setting today because the park exists in large part because Walt Whitman in 1846 and 1847, when he was the editor of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, said Brooklyn needs a park. Brooklyn was a fast-growing city at that time, and there wasn't a place for recreation. And Whitman lobbied to get a place for the working population to come and to relax, to be in contact with nature. I first came across Walt Whitman when I was in the 4th grade of Catholic elementary school. And the Whitman poem we worked on was "O Captain, My Captain," which is the most atypical Walt Whitman poem. I then went through elementary school, high school, undergrad, and I never studied another Whitman poem. So when I finally was graduated from college, I said to myself, you have a real lack in your education. You don't know other Whitman. So I started to read Whitman, and I really just got into him for any number of reasons. Even though Whitman wasn't born in Brooklyn, as I said, he was here for about a third of his life. I was born in Brooklyn, and when you start to read his prose and he starts mentioning Flatbush Avenue and Tillery Street and Johnson Street, locations, streets that still exist, I just started to feel closer to him.
Flow on, river, flow with the flood tide and ebb with the ebb tide. Frolic on, crested and scallop-edged waves, gorgeous clouds of the sunset, drench with your splendor me or the men and women generations after me. Cross from shore to shore countless crowds of passengers. Stand up, tall masts of Manhattan. Stand up, beautiful hills of Brooklyn. Throb, baffled and curious brain. Throw out questions and answers. Suspend here and everywhere, eternal float of solution. Gaze, loving and thirsting eyes in the house or streets or public assembly.
My name is Brad Vogel, and I'm many things, but I'm really a Walt Whitman enthusiast, I guess, for the purposes of this video. We're also here at the Gowanus Dredgers Canoe Club Boathouse because I'm the captain of the Gowanus Dredgers. It's a volunteer canoe club that goes out on the polluted Superfund site that is the Gowanus Canal here in Brooklyn. I also work day by day as the nonprofit executive director for the Preservation Archive project here in the city. I do a few other things beyond that too. I'm a poet here and there, historic preservationist, generally out in the community as an advocate. I like to keep things interesting, I guess, is maybe one way to sum it all up. I'm a poet. I have written poetry since about 4th grade, and I also live in Brooklyn. I'm into historic preservation. I'm gay. The list of variables that all sort of drove me toward Walt Whitman and his legacy, I guess, is very long. What really triggered it all, though, was in 2016. I went to an event put on by the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project. This is a group looking at sites of importance to the LGBT community, many of which have been overlooked for a long time and which have rarely ever before been raised up to any kind of prominence. And I went to their event, and as they're flipping through the slides of all the places, it's, you know, some obvious places like Stonewall, Julius's Bar in the Village. And then they get to the fact that the house where Walt Whitman lived in Brooklyn when he first published Leaves of Grass in 1855, and actually his only standing residents left of over 30 that were in Brooklyn and Manhattan. A, I didn't know that that existed, and B, I didn't know that it wasn't landmark. Both of those came as a huge shock to me, and that realization propelled me into taking action. I thought, you know, I will kick myself if 10 years from now this house is demolished and nobody else has the chance to go and walk past and think, wow, this is the place where this man was living as he brought Leaves of Grass out into the world, and it had so many ripples out from that time. So I really dove in. I started working on an effort to get the building landmarked, and I submitted a request for evaluation to the city's Landmarks Preservation Commission, trying to get them to designate it as a city-level landmark because that's where the teeth are. State and federal are great, but they're mostly honorific. They really don't protect the building from demolition. So at that point, I started building a coalition of other groups and individuals that I thought would be interested in saving his legacy, and we really pulled together an insane coalition. It was everyone from former US Poet Laureate Robert Pinsky to Ample Hills Creamery, the ice cream chain, to the Brooklyn Historical Society, Municipal Art Society, LGBT groups, historic preservation groups, neighborhood groups, literary groups, you name it. It was just a cavalcade of people who all understood that as a city of New York's caliber, how in the world have we not said this one extant house we have that ties in with Whitman, why haven't we done anything with this? It was literally, people were incredulous when you would tell them this story. And so from there, I met Karen Carpenter of the Walt Whitman Initiative through all of my efforts, and really through Jay Shockley at the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project. He said, you know, you're both sort of working at the same thing. So we started communicating, and immediately we realized we were on the same frequency and became fast friends very quickly as we realized just how much we were working on overlapping things.
How does New York as a place and Brooklyn as a place, how does it emerge from his works?
Delicate sniffs of the sea breeze, smells of sedgy grass.
Hi, my name is Karen Carpenter. I am a Whitman scholar, and you are meeting me in one of my favorite places, which is the Hungarian pastry shop on Amsterdam around 110th Street. It is I guess it's a bohemian hangout, and I would like to think that Walt would have hung out here too. It has a flavor like Fox, one of his favorite places in the city, further downtown. And it's very dear to me because I have read a lot of Whitman here and done a lot of writing here. I'm from New York. I was born in Brooklyn a long time ago, and I currently teach at New York University, and I myself went to Columbia, which is right around the corner here, so it tells you something about my attachment to Whitman, the poet of New York. So I first started reading Whitman seriously just a few blocks up from here at Columbia. I took a class called Whitman and Dickinson with a professor, Jonathan Levin, great guy, and my mind was blown. I must have read Whitman before. He is a local poet, but that class really put him on the map for me. And from there, I got very interested in his positioning in New York. I didn't find a lot of books or research on his placement in the city and how he interacted with the city. So I developed a class, which I still teach at Columbia, which takes people on tours for about half the time. Half the time we're in the classroom, the other half we're actually walking around in Brooklyn or downtown Manhattan, and we're experiencing the spirit of New York as he encountered it. So for me, Whitman is a very physical presence. He is alive, and a lot of the work that I do tries to make sure that other people think so too.
It feels so good to talk to Brooklyn about this because he's really Brooklyn's poet. You know, he for Whitman, Brooklyn represented a certain neighborliness. It was a philanthropic place where he could grow as an artist. He really got bedrocked in Brooklyn. And then Manhattan, across the water, right, a sister city, but kind of separated at birth, sister city, was giving him totally different stuff, right? He was on fire from what he saw in Manhattan.
Whitman loves music and loves opera during the 1840s, which was a time of tremendous expansion of opera production in New York City. As he said, he was on the free list. He was getting complimentary tickets to go see and to review operas. And he fell in love with this genre, a genre which at first he was not interested in and which he wrote negatively about. Well, he really changed about that. As a matter of fact, Italian opera becomes a major influence on his poetry. I feel I have so much in common with him because I too am an opera fan, and indeed I make my living by producing opera, sometimes here in New York, mostly in Florida. A few things coming up, all related to Walt. Walt, one of America's greatest writers. Also, like Whitman, I want to create community. I feel it's so important with what I do with the Walt Whitman Project, just to remind people that what they see here and now had a different age, a different life to it. And I think sometimes we just need to relax and breathe a little bit more easily and remind ourselves that the way things are is not how they always were. And how were they? And how can we connect to that? And how should that guide us to the future? I find so discouraging what's going on right now in Brooklyn, which just seems to me there's just this senseless overdevelopment of buildings too tall and streets becoming overly crowded and actually encroaching even here on what I feel is the airspace of the park. Whitman was so right when he said that to have successful democracy in America, even in an urban area, we need reference, we need access to nature.
A typical day, I think that's a very difficult thing to define for me, in a good way. Some days it actually involves coming over here to the boathouse and taking a canoe out and going for an hour-long paddle in the morning and just finding that weird but lovely bit of tranquility out on the water. It's so funny sometimes to see the cars and the traffic on the BQE overhead and to hear the cement trucks rumbling around, but then to be out in the water in a canoe solo and to see either a kingfisher sort of hopscotch along with you and to hear its call, or an egret, or to see little crabs sunning themselves in the nooks in the wooden bulkheads. You never quite know what you'll see, or even sometimes very interestingly, the pollution in the canal itself really can be quite beautiful. These sort of rainbow swirls of coal tar that are out there, which hopefully will be gone within my lifetime. They're working on the cleanup of the canal, but it's certainly not there yet. But my day often is very much dependent on what is happening in the preservation world. I'll be out at meetings, I'll be meeting with donors potentially, meeting with partner organizations, but I have to travel all the way to the Upper East Side to my actual office, so that's a long haul, but thankfully I like reading. I like where I live, I like what I do for work, and I like to read, and that's what makes an hour-long each-way commute on the trains work. I do remember walking to work in Manhattan, and that has its charms, I will tell you. But ultimately, I'll do my work up at the office, but I'm oftentimes roaming all around the city. Right now we're running a preservation film festival for work, so I am heading to places like Staten Island, the Bronx, Coney Island, Queens, literally just all over out and around the city, and I love that. I love being out and meeting people all over the place.
Let's see, a typical day for me is probably quite different from the way that Whitman lived in the city. I'm a mom, so a typical day is dropping off my daughter Annika at school, going for my run, going grocery shopping, but professionally, as a teacher, as an NYU professor, I seek to connect with my students and represent the type of passion I feel when I read works by Whitman and by others who have these meaningful, open messages to relate. So a big part of what I do is share and provide empathy for others, especially my students. My intention, I guess, is always to keep that dialogue open between myself and Whitman and the general public, whether that is teaching him or publishing on him. Whitman is very much a voice of the people, and I feel like he speaks directly to the people of New York, and that's always been a mission of mine in my work to emphasize that. His words appear a lot in New York. Right now they wind around the AIDS memorial. That is a Jenny Holzer sculpture of Song of Myself. You can also find him in Brooklyn along the ferry landing, where he used to take the Fulton Ferry across. There's words from Crossing Brooklyn Ferry there. You've got to visit Ample Hills Creamery when you're in Brooklyn, because that's also named after a line from Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. We've got Whitman's restaurant now in 2 locations, so Whitman is very much present, but I think also the spirit of his work, the democratic message, the egalitarian pose that he takes is a really important message for us politically today. In fact, here we're sitting in Hungarian pastry shop, and right outside the window there's a sign, "All are welcome here." And I think Whitman would have written that, when he was alive here in the city. And that's very much part of our work at the Whitman Initiative, to put poetry on the streets of New York, but also the democratic message of Whitman, and to enable people who might not have access to poetry to have it. We are also trying to landmark 99 Ryerson, which is a big initiative for us for people to see the house where Leaves of Grass was completed. A very simple, beautiful, typical Brooklyn home, not a mansion, just an everyday house, but that too is where poetry can start.
We launched a Change.org petition that now has over 5,000 signatures in favor of landmarking. We got the city council speaker, the majority leader, who is also the local district person surrounding the house, and the entire LGBT caucus of the city council to send a public letter of support for landmarking. We got written up in the New York Times, NPR, the whole 9 yards. But LPC rejected our request for evaluation, saying the building had been too altered and that Whitman didn't live there long enough. They also used some things that I think are actually not legal bases for their decision, including saying that we don't need to preserve this building because we already have Whitman's birthplace out on Long Island saved and the place where he died in Camden saved. That's wholly irrelevant to what the LPC should be considering within New York City. Anyway, I went back to them with a 13-page rebuttal. They said, "Thank you, we'll look at it," and never heard anything further. We went back with yet another rebuttal and another request this year, countering more of the information that they use. So it's been a long slog.
Every year we hold a reading of Song of Myself, Whitman's hugest, greatest poem. It has 52 sections, totally free, non-commercial, no one is sponsoring. We do it ourselves, and anyone can write to songofmyselfmarathon@gmail.com and sign up to read or perform or recite in a different language or use a rodeo lariat or dance. We've got people coming from everywhere reading him in every different language.
弦乐队带着我旋转，使我飞得比天王星还高。它从我身上攫取了连我自己都不知道我怀有的热情。
Voyaging to every port to dicker and adventure, hurrying with the modern crowd, as eager and fickle as any.
I think Whitman was so right when he envisioned that a place like Fort Greene Park was necessary for the well-being of the people of Brooklyn. Not only for the people that he knew in Brooklyn, but for us who now benefit from his vision and his work in lobbying for the creation of this park. We're here, enjoy it. When you come in, let the cares of the world just kind of melt away. So when you leave, you are refreshed and better connected, not only with nature, but with your community and with others.
I am not an earth, nor an adjunct of an earth. I am the mate and companion of people, all just as immortal and fathomless as myself. They do not know how immortal, but I know.
firm masculine Coulter, it shall be you.
But yeah, I think Whitman also, he's complicated, and I think the complications are also, frankly, part of why he's still relevant, is that we live in a complicated world and we are complicated people. And Walt Whitman, in some ways, holds up a mirror for us and says, yes, I too am quite complicated. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. And he says, go forward even with those contradictions. There are some things that we will not be able to explain necessarily. Poetry can attempt to sort of crawfish back into a sense of why, but it may never actually get there. And in realizing that, you just simply have to have confidence and go forward. And when things are complicated, bad, negative, pessimistic, there seems to be no hope. Whitman in his poetry somehow ends up scarfing all of that down, like this great big carp who can just endlessly eat all of this polluted muck, almost like out in Gowanus here. And yet still somehow out of it comes poetry, optimism, a sense that, isn't it wondrous that we're experiencing all of this? Isn't it amazing the possibilities that lie ahead? That to me is a really powerful thing to keep in your quiver.
En voor alle veldheren wier leger verslagen werd, en voor alle overwonnene helden.
In the late afternoon, choosing a safe spot to pass the night, kindling a fire and broiling the fresh-killed game.
But I know that it is in me.
A gigantic beauty of a stallion, fresh and responsive to my caresses, head high in the forehead and wide between the ears.
So at the end of Song of Myself, Whitman says, listener up there. And it's a freak out moment for a lot of people because you realize he's directly addressing you, right? You're reading a book that's down here and you are the listener up there. But it makes me think, how can you help, right? If you're watching this and you're really interested in what I'm doing and enjoying this magnificent film that Dee has made, how can you connect with Whitman? Well, I guess number one answer would be read. Pick up a book and start reading the poetry. A lot of people are intimidated by the poetry, but it's actually so beautiful. You have to sit with it a bit and maybe just glide in and out of it, but to read poetry brings you right back to him. Stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all things. You shall possess the good of the earth and sun. There are millions of suns left. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the specters and hooks. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them from yourself. I heard when the talkers were talking, the talk of the beginning and the end, but I do not talk of the beginning or the end. There was never any more inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, nor will ever be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven or hell than there is now. Urge and urge and urge, always the procreant urge of the world.
Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you.